Okay, today we are doing collecting, displaying, and analyzing data. The mean is the sum of the values in a set of data divided by the number of data items in the set. Just another fancy word for average that you probably learned about in elementary. The median is the middle number or the mean average of the two middle numbers in an ordered set. So middle number. The mode is the number or numbers that occur the most often in a set of data. When all the numbers occur with the same frequency, there is no mode. So number occurs most. The range is the difference between the greatest value and the least value. So biggest number minus the smallest. And an outlier is a value much greater or much less than the others in a data set. Like if everyone scored in the 80s and 90s on a quiz and then one person scored a 20%, that's the 20% the outlier because it's going to bring the class average down. Or if everyone did really, really horrible on a quiz and then someone got 100%, the 100% is the outlier because it's going to bring the class average up and look like everybody did much better than they actually did. So the first thing on example 1, we're going to find all four things. We're going to find the mean, median, mode, and range of the data set 4, 7, 8, 2, 1, 2, 4, 2. Okay? Now the mean is where you take all those numbers and you add them together. If you take all those numbers and add them together, you get 30. Okay? There are 8 numbers, so you divide the sum, or 30, by 8. And when you do that, you get the answer of 3.75. You can do that on a calculator as long as you can show me this whole number and those numbers there. So the mean is 3.75. The average of all those numbers is 3.75. The median, you have to do an extra step. You have to arrange the values in order, okay? Because if you don't, you will not get an accurate middle number. So how I find that middle number is cross this off, cross the last one off, cross the first, cross the last, cross the first, cross the last. Now in this case we have 2 middle numbers, okay? So because there's 2 middle numbers, I have to find the average of those 2 values. So I add them together, 2 plus 4, and I get 6, and then I divide it by 2, and I get 3. So the median is 3. Now, if you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and crossed, crossed. Now here there's only one middle value, so that would be your middle value. The mode is the number that appears the most, okay? And if you look at this, you see that the value of 2 occurs 3 times, 4 occurs twice, and the rest of them only occur once. So the mode is 2 because it occurs more than any other number. The range is when you subtract the least value from the greatest value. So our greatest value is 8 and our least value is 1. So we do 8 minus 1 and get 7. So the range is 7. The line plot shows the number of miles of each of the 17 members of the cross-country team ran in a week. Which measure of central tendency best describes the data? Justify your answer. So, we're going to start with the mean, okay? Now, in order to do that, we have to add all our numbers up. Each x is a 4, or a 5, or 6, or a 14, 15, or 16. So we don't just put 1 4. Notice how they put 5 4s here, because there are 5 x's all the way down. When they added all those x's up, they got 153, and there are 17 x's. And when you divide, you get 9. Now the mean best describes the data set because the data is clustered fairly evenly in about 2 areas. Meaning you don't have one outlier in the low region or the high region. You have a bunch of low numbers, you have a bunch of high numbers, so it's going to fall somewhere in the middle for your average. If you looked at the median, okay, you would cross smallest and greatest, and you would get, I feel like I'm supposed to cross that off. So the median is 6, either way. So that's saying they ran around 6. Well, 2 of them ran 6. There was a bunch that ran under, but there was a bunch that ran above. So the median does not describe the data set because too many values are not clustered around the data value 6. Because you have all of these, okay? So, now let's look at our other option. The greatest number of x's occurs above the number 4. So the mode is 4. The mode focuses on one data value and not the data set. So that doesn't really work. Okay? So, and the range doesn't work because that just tells us what the difference is. So, the mean is the best one for that reason. The data shows Sarah's scores for the last 5 math tests. She had an 88, a 90, a 55, 94, and 89. Identify the outlier in the data set, then determine how the outlier affects the mean, median, mode of the data. Then tell which measure of central tendency best describes the data with the outlier. So the outlier is 55 because the rest of the scores are in the high 80s and lower 90s. And 55 is just completely doesn't even relate to them. Okay? So, without the outlier means we add up the 4 scores that are fairly reasonably close together, and we get 361, and we divide it by 4 because there were 4 scores, and we get 90.25. Now, with the outlier means we add the 55 in there, and we get 416, and we divide it by 5 because there are now 5 scores, and we get 83.2. You see how the outlier really affects that? That's like saying if everyone in class got a really high score on a test, but we had a few really low scores, it could make the class look like they did a lot worse than they actually did, or vice versa, and a lot better than they did if we had a bunch of bad scores and a few good scores. The median, now we need to put the 89 in there, okay? We have a high and a low, and then we have 2 middle numbers. So we're going to add those together and divide by 2, and we get 89.5. So the median is 89.5. Now, for the mode, there is no mode because every number only appears once. There's not a number that appears more than any other. Now, with the outlier, they didn't put 89 in there. So for our median, we get 89. And again, for the mode, there is no mode because every score only appears once. So adding the outlier decreased the mean by 7.05 and the median by 0.5. There is no mode with or without the outlier. And the median best describes the data with the outlier because with the outlier, the range really pulls that down, but this shows us where she is more or less. Okay, maybe she just had a bad test, but then she was able to fix things and then do good on the next test. Well, this shows us more of a representation of how well she did. Okay? So then go down to the check it out and do your mean, median, mode, and range.